a forest road where motorists report terrifying encounters with a broke-neck ghost, an old pioneer cemetery where a dangerous witch lurks in the shadows, and an abandoned military fort harboring ghosts, monsters, and much darker things await on this journey through some of the most haunted places in Oregon. Are you sure you're ready for this one? Kicking off this adventure, our first haunt takes us to northwestern Oregon, into the Willamette Valley and on a walk through Lafayette Pioneer Cemetery. Lafayette Pioneer Cemetery, which is located where else but in Lafayette, Oregon, is a weathered historic site that, in recent years, has grown massively in infamy amongst paranormal researchers and dark tourists for its ties to some incredible and simultaneously terrifying legends. Historically, this old graveyard's past spans back to the mid-19th century when, circa 1846 or so, the growing community selected the old plot, which likely had freestanding graves on it, as a place of final resting for the budding township. Some of the earliest legible burials span back to this same era, with the interment most often cited as the first being that of Henrietta Hodges, a young girl who arrived to the locale by way of wagon train. While graves begin mounting, land for the cemetery actually wasn't officially purchased and organized until 1874, and its earliest parts reflect a strong frontier influence courtesy of some of the area's first settlers. Over the years, the cemetery would change hands a number of times before falling under the ownership of the local historical society, who has worked to preserve it ever since. In the present, the Lafayette Pioneer Cemetery is a popular stop for those seeking a fright, and beyond its picture-perfect bent wrought iron gates and across its dried, grassy fields, it's rumored that something dark lurks under the moonlight. You see, this old burial site is tied to two of Oregon's most spine-tingling and also strangely compelling ghost stories, one having to do with a woman by the name of Lena Elsie Emis, and the other concerning an Anna Marple. The first story, being the one involving Ms. Emis, tells of how in 1908 she became depressed and chose to end her own life by way of drinking carbolic acid at her home, which happened to sit at the site of the present-day Argyle winery, but we'll save that for another listing. Subsequently, Emis was buried at Lafayette, and it's believed her spirit still lingers, with visitors telling of encounters with a woman in an old-fashioned dress that walks through the yard at night, avoiding the living, and that always brings with her the scent of either flowers or perfume, the very same scent smelled within the Argyle winery from time to time. The second story concerning Lafayette is a bit more disturbing and also a bit more infamous than the last, and that's, of course, the legend of Anna Marple. You see, as lore and history intertwine to tell it, Anna Marple was a prominent local citizen through the mid to late 19th century, and in 1887, her son Richard was hanged for the murder and dismemberment of David I. Corker, a crime that many believe Anna probably had a hand in. Now, when this legend is told, people whisper different things, including that Anna was practicing dark magic, or that she was later executed by witch trial. Whatever the case, even after her son's execution, or before her alleged execution, she stood in front of the community that would condemn her and spewed a curse that promised that everything they loved would burn not once, not twice, but 3 times. And that was that. Or at least that's what the townsfolk tried to tell themselves, before their entire town, literally burned to the ground. To date, Lafayette has fallen to flames twice, which some suggest begs the question, when will Anna's last big fire hit? While Anna Marple was buried elsewhere, for whatever reason, her ghost is said to inhabit the old graveyard, possibly tormenting the souls of all of those buried there that took adversarial sides in lives lived long ago. And her half-witch, half-wraith-like form has been sighted flitting through the skies after dark as she cackles into the night and chases any who dare enter her domain. Encounters with the ghost of Anna are so frequent, in fact, that there are literal databases for those who feel the need to report them, and many of such reports entail damage to vehicles or even scratches or bruises discovered later by those who were sent running from the property in a panic as they were chased by this sinister entity. Our second haunt has us hiking the high desert of Central Oregon and exploring the historic Huntington Wagon Road. The Huntington Wagon Road Interpretive Trail, which is placed halfway between Bend and Redmond in Central Oregon, is actually a short portion of a much larger trail utilized primarily through the mid-1800s that's since become a popular historic site and stop for both locals and tourists looking to take a beautiful high desert stroll amongst both nature and the past. But don't let its picturesque setting fool you. The earth that makes up this road is literally soaked in blood, and more than a few stories of ghostly activity along it have surfaced in recent times. Historically, predating settlement of the landscape, the area now holding the Huntington Wagon Route was once frequented by tribes native to the region, including the Wasco, Tonino, and the Northern Paiute, all whom thrived in the odd climate by way of fishing its plentiful rivers and lakes in the summer and moving towards the Willamette Valley in the winter. Incidentally, in a time where foot travel was most common, a number of primitive trails sprouted up over the centuries, and, surprise surprise, several were plotted right up next to our present-day wagon road. However, it really was never the most effective route, and it wasn't until much later, circa the 1860s, that an improved route was even considered. Then, in 1864, everything changed. You see, that year, Oregon Superintendent of Indian Affairs J.W. Perry Huntington would guide a party to Fort Klamath to make peace with the Klamath, Modoc, and Paiute tribes, after which a peace treaty was signed and in 1866, the Klamath Reservation was established. By the terms of the treaty, the U.S. government was required to provide supplies to the tribes, and through the fall of 1867, Huntington would guide a wagon expedition from the Dalles to Fort Klamath, mapping and officializing what he called the Huntington Wagon Road as he did so. Over subsequent years, the road was utilized by travelers, farmers, bandits, and others from pretty much all walks of life, up through the end of the 19th century when roadways and towns began filling in the blanks on the map. Now, there's really no telling how long surviving pieces of the wagon route were utilized after the invention of, things like cars and roads, but as we don't really have an accurate documentation, I think it's fair to speculate that the road was likely used by locals, ranchers, etc., all the way up into more recent times, until it finally garnered recognition and sometime from 1990 to the year 2000 was officialized as the interpretive site that we know and love today. As mentioned earlier, in the present, the Huntington Wagon Road Interpretive Trail is now a popular stretch for hikers, dog walkers, historians, for class field trips, and much more. And all along it are signs of its usage, including wagon tire marks, bullet holes in trees, and even the occasional recovered artifact, either native or colonial. While no one is really sure who or what haunts this small chunk of what was previously such a long and influential route, some theorize that it's likely by ghosts tied to a native burial ground that was disturbed when Huntington originally cut out his iconic trail, while others think it has to do with the spirits of all those who perished the old road's many hazards, be they devised by nature or by man. Whatever the case, those frequenting this old path have told of disembodied voices, shouts, and hoofbeats that emanate from thin air, of instances of footprints or authentic seeming wagon tracks found in mud after rainstorms, and accounts from those who have braved the area after dark catching orbs and other strange anomalies in the backgrounds of photography and video. As a common dog walking path, some of the creepiest stories surrounding the Huntington Wagon Road have to do with walkers' furry companions, and them reacting to unseen presences or refusing to go any further down the stretch, as if they sense danger. On more than a few occasions, normally calm dogs have become panicked, borderline aggressive in their attempts to get back to their owners' vehicles, and a handful of individuals have described encounters with animals natural to the area that seem off, as if they're watching over the site, wise beyond measure. Additionally, more than a few dares have resulted in various groups bringing Ouija boards out to the road, or in covert nighttime visits, and in the area's absence of light. While some say the dark is just playing tricks on people's minds, there are those who swear they've seen something out there in the darkness. A looming white silhouette that moves through the brush with ease, and that lets out occasional whistles. Number 3 takes us up to the northern Oregon coast and has us braving the iconic and also infamous Fort Stevens State Park. Fort Stevens, which is located in Clatsop County in Oregon, is a 19th century military fortification placed off of the southern shore of the mouth of the Columbia River, which, for those of us familiar with the area, means of course that it sits right off of the northern Oregon coast, near the towns of Seaside, Warrenton, and Astoria, in its own isolated little chunk of coastal forest. And into more recent times, the defense's abandoned posts, bunkers, and empty mess halls have harbored more than just tourists. They've picked up quite the assortment of local legends and tales of strong paranormal activity. Historically, what was initially known as the Fort at Point Adams was constructed as an earthwork battery from 1863 to 1864 during the Civil War, and in 1865 it would be re-established as Fort Stevens in honor of former Washington Governor Isaac Stevens, who was actually killed in action during the war. Moving forward, Stevens would be included in what was to be the three-fort harbor defense system at the mouth of the Columbia River, and it would play a part in the conclusion of the Pig War through regional tensions in the San Juan Islands circa 1870, and was even important during the Alaska boundary dispute. As a notable bit of history, in 1906, the ship the Peter Iredale would run aground right next to Fort Stevens, and its crew would seek refuge within the defense. The wreckage from this incident is still visible to this day, and is a popular stop in what is now part of a state park centered around the fort. Following World War I, the Navy would establish a radio station on fort grounds. In 1932, they would install another secret radio to listen in on Japanese Navy coded messages. And amidst World War II, on the night of June 21st going on to the 22nd, a Japanese sub actually surfaced right off the coast and fired 17 shells at the fort, marking it as the first military installation in the contiguous US to come under enemy fire during the war. Following World War II, Fort Stevens was decommissioned. All of its armaments were removed and its buildings were auctioned off to the Corps of Engineers, before, in 1971, being added to the National Register of Historic Places, and in 1975 being turned over to Oregon Parks and Rec. In the present, Fort Stevens and its associated state park remain prominent fixtures along the coastline, and are popular stops not just amongst history buffs and sightseers, but more recently, amongst paranormal investigators as well, due to the purported range of ghostly encounters experienced near. While no one has actually died at the fort due to any battles or anything like that, nor to the shelling courtesy of the aforementioned Japanese submarine, there have been deaths across both fort grounds and throughout the nearby area, including a slew of natural deaths, a drowning through the late 1800s, a fatality during a 1944 pilot rescue, and more recently, in 2008, a tragic murder-suicide would transpire within the site's bounds. These incidents, coupled with the fact that the fort sits literally right off the coast from the mouth of the Columbia, which is commonly called the Graveyard of the Pacific, on account of it claiming so many ships and lives over the years, has resulted in local legends telling of inexplicable happenings across the landscape. Visitors have reported hearing disembodied voices and boot steps from within vacant structures. Similarly, boot prints are often found in fresh mud when no one else is around, and many describe feeling the constant and unnerving sensation that someone or something is watching their movements closely, from somewhere just out of sight. One of the most haunted places on Fort Stevens grounds, as legend has it, is Battery Russell, which was an installment that boasted two 10-inch disappearing guns. While some claim that one unnamed man was killed during the shelling of the fort, which was primarily concentrated on Battery Russell, and that his death was never reported for political or morale reasons, it's believed that this or some similar circumstance resulted in a haunting infestation. It is worth noting that the shelling did take place in the World War II era, and documentation was fairly accurate, and it's not likely the fort would have hidden a death that had occurred on site, but it is possible patrol, so it's really anyone's guess what's lurking in the battery's darkest corners. But those who have entered, especially after nightfall, have told of whispers heard from the shadows, of disembodied voices filled with the static of a radio transmission, and even several instances in which what seemed to be loud explosions were heard outside so clearly that they shook the very ground, only for terrified witnesses to run from the building to find their surroundings completely undisturbed, and everything as quiet as the grave. Lastly, campers at sites through the park have told of strange anomalies with personal electronics, of instances of half-formed silhouettes or orbs found in the backgrounds of photography and video, and of encounters with a slew of full-bodied apparitions in clothing ranging back to before the area was even settled, and two figures that are pretty major to the dark tourist/paranormal research scene have been sighted across park bounds as well, including that of the iconic and legendary Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, and the much more terrifying and murdery Bandage Man, who, without going into too much detail because I'm definitely dedicating an entire listing to the Bandage Man in the future, is the deranged spirit of either a murderer or a psychopath that was burned to death in an accident in life, and in death that's been known to manifest as a gauze-covered mummy-like horror that reeks of burning flesh, and that's been known both to appear in the back seats of vehicles moving through the area, as well as for running through campsites shrieking maniacally in the middle of the night before disappearing into the dark. Number 4 has us road tripping through 4 different counties on the well-traveled Oregon Route 22. Oregon Route 22, which runs through Tillamook, Yamhill, Polk, and Marion counties in Oregon on its way from the Cascade Mountains to the coast, is a 139-mile stretch of roadway that's a popular drive for those living in larger metros such as Salem to escape to the serenity of local beaches, and its deceptively beautiful scenery harbors some of the state's spookiest ghost stories and local legends. Historically, predating settlement, a number of tribes native to the region would inhabit various areas along what is now Route 22, and several prominent trails paralleled portions of our modern highway which, just as we do now, opted for the path of least resistance through the rough and rather mountainous and treacherous wilderness of Oregon. Through the early to mid-1800s and following the famous Lewis and Clark expedition of 1804, and predating many of our more prominent Western American settlements, trails both linked to Fort Vancouver and also formed through the Hudson's Bay Company were cut across the landscape. Through the 1830s and 40s, what was known as the Oregon immigration period would begin, and settlers would start arriving to the Willamette Valley, during which time Salem, which is Oregon's standing capital, would grow to become an important regional center, and a number of wagon roads from it to pretty much everywhere else were officialized. Through the remainder of the 1800s, a handful of counties saw the introduction of grading, gravel roads, bridges, and culverts, and through the turn of the 20th century and the onset of the automobile age, some of our first cars would use a primitive version of Oregon Route 22 which, to probably honestly undersell it, was pretty much a constant man-made dust storm through the summers thanks to automobiles, and was either treacherously muddy or deadly iced over through the winter months. As the 1920s and 30s raged on, the practice of paving roads would slowly cover the map, and as old timber crossings were replaced with stalwart steel construction bridges, year-round travel along the route would actually become a reality, though that's not to say it wasn't deadly at times. Heck, as a born and raised Oregonian, if you've ever traveled up that route when the weather is really bad, it's still pretty friggin' deadly, especially if you're not paying attention. From the 1930s through the 50s, New Deal-era labor would result in improved grades, bridges, and roadways. And during this time, in 1932, Oregon Route 22 was officialized. From the 1960s through the 80s, OSR 22 became recognized as a public designation, and as wanderlust spread like fever, traffic along the route increased as, over the decades, millions traveled from inland to the coast upon it. To date, ORS 22 remains the primary means by which to travel from the state's capital city to the coast, and over its lengthy usage, it has acted as scene to some of the most terrifying local legends around. To jumpstart it all, To the east, all the way through, and to the west of Salem, 22 is actually a fairly chonky multi-lane roadway, and while traffic through these portions is such a blur that the only thing drivers are usually focused on is the road, these stretches have witnessed quite a few fatal accidents, and those that travel them with frequency report ghostly voices heard through car radios, loud crashing sounds that emanate from thin air, and instances of both hitchhikers that disappear whenever someone pulls over to pick them up, or of entire accident scenes that are so hyper-realistic they've warranted calls to the authorities, who always arrive to find this stretch of 22 completely clear and free of any debris whatsoever. On par with Oregonian paranormal lore, also reported along 22, and confined to no area in particular, are countless Sasquatch sightings, UFOs that are visible on clear nights, and all manner of documentation regarding everything from shadowy figures to werewolf-like beasts that are usually spied off the edges of the roadway. And while all of this already makes for a pretty spooky drive, it's actually a particular reoccurring phenomenon that seems to manifest right between the coastal town of Hebo and the slightly more inland Happy Hollow that's considered Route 22's most terrifying haunting. You see, a simple internet search for ghost stories along Oregon State Route 22 will pull up a ridiculous number of posts from those who have encountered the area's iconic Broke Neck Lady. One more famous post, which was left on Reddit by user dignified_fruit, tells of one such experience. As a bit of a prelude, Fruit gives us a backstory in which he reveals he is not only a veteran, but very well accustomed to working in emergency rooms, as specialized security, and in other fields that require a constitution not an ounce short of unwavering, and also that he has never been prone to getting creeped out. Late one night around 11 p.m., however, Fruit and his wife were traveling 22 when they rounded a bend and spotted something hunkered off to the side of the road. As they neared this figure, what they saw horrified them. It was a woman, or at least whatever it really was trying to look like a woman. As they described it, this thing had disheveled gray hair, its arms were bent up to its chest with its wrists curled, and its head was flopped over to the side as if its neck was broken, with its face frozen in an open-mouth expression of limp terror, mouth wide open, and eyes bottomless and dark. While Fruit initially contemplated going back to see if it was maybe someone that needed help or something, his wife stopped him and told him that she wasn't sure what that thing was, but that he most certainly wasn't to turn around. Shortly after this encounter, the couple would call in their sighting, just in case what they'd really seen was someone who was in trouble, but no missing persons were ever reported, nor were any accidents or injuries. Now, over the years, multiple additional stories involving this broke neck lady have surfaced, each just as terrifying as the last, with some involving motorists who were broken down and stuck locked in their cars as the lady scratches at their windows through the night. Others, where walkers or bikers are followed by this eerie phantom at great lengths, and others still, in which she has actually appeared in the back seats of moving vehicles. Saving the spookiest for last, our fifth and final haunt has us touring Portland's ever-famous Pittock Mansion. The illustrious Pittock Mansion, which is placed in the West Hills of Portland, Oregon, is a historic French Renaissance-style estate turned popular museum space and event venue. That's bounds are utilized for countless tours, field trips, weddings, and more each year, and that totes its very own array of urban legends and tales of supernatural encounters. Historically, this prestigious mansion's past starts with who else but Henry Pittock, who was born in London circa 1835 or 36, and who traveled with his family to Pittsburgh at the age of 4, where his father established a printing business. Through their youths, Henry and his older brother Robert filled many an afternoon by reading fantastical stories of the Wild West, and at the age of only 17, he and Robert would depart along the Oregon Trail with several other families. After the long journey, Henry would arrive to Portland, Oregon barefoot and without a cent in his pockets. At first, he would shoot for a job with the Oregon Spectator out of Oregon City, but nothing would land. Next, he was offered a job as a bartender, but he would decline the work. And after a time, he would finally be hired on by the editor of the Weekly Oregonian, Thomas J. Dyer, who would pay Henry with room and board. The thing is, Dyer was much more concerned with politics than he was his paper, and after working dutifully for the Oregonian for years, when Dyer lacked the funds to pay Henry, he actually gave him partnership interests instead, until Henry found himself acting as manager and editor. In 1857, Pittock is credited for being the first to ascend to the very summit of Mount Hood, and circa 1860, while leaving his work one day, he would call to a woman in a carriage named Georgiana Martin Burton, and after a short period of courting, the two would fall deeply in love and would marry, after which Henry would take over full ownership of the paper. Henry and Georgiana would live charmed lives. They would amass a fortune, all while focusing on the growth of the Portland locale. Much later, in 1909, Pittock would set to work on the construction of his impressive mansion, and when complete enough for the couple to reside there circa 1913 or 14, this estate would not only act as a home to Henry, his wife, Georgiana, and their children. No, it would act as a shrine to the thing the couple loved most, the city of Portland. Sadly, the Pittocks would only get to enjoy their construct for a few short years, as Georgiana would pass on in June of 1918, and Henry just months later in January of 1919. The mansion would remain in Pittock family hands for years to come until 1958, when one Eric Ladd and Pittock grandson Peter Gantenbein, who was actually born in the house, decided to put the property up for sale. Unfortunately, it was a hard sell, and damages caused to the property through the Columbus Day storm of 1962 would result in its owners actually considering a full demolition. However, the community would raise $75,000 over the span of 3 months in order to help the city purchase the property, after which, in a little under 2 years, it was reopened as a historic and museum site. In 1974, the mansion was added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 2006, the city would estimate a total of $6 to $8 million worth of repairs were necessary, and through the years and into the present, the site would welcome a host of renovations and revitalization projects. Today, Pittock Mansion remains a popular attraction on the edge of Forest Park. It offers touring options, educational opportunities, and even provides a number of spaces that are available to rent for various events, including for weddings, business meetings, community fundraisers, and much, much more. Fitting the bill as your classic haunted mansion, this looming estate owes its paranormal legacy to the legends that the spirits of none other than Henry and Georgiana Pittock themselves linger within their beloved home, along with the spirits of a few others that were linked to either them or the property as well. And both staff and visitors to its bounds have reported lights that turn on and off by themselves, extreme cold patches felt in otherwise warm rooms, and instances of objects sighted moving around on their own. Notably, this latter phenomenon has been observed by very large gatherings renting the space, and entire parties have watched in awe as silverware slides across tables, as doors open and close briefly as if someone unseen is passing through them, and as chandeliers start to swing inexplicably. In life, Georgiana Pittock was an avid gardener. In fact, she was responsible for the 1888 founding of the Portland Rose Society, is considered the founder of the Rose Festival itself, and the first rose competition was actually hosted in her very own garden in Portland. That all being said, until her final days, whenever someone came to visit Georgiana at the mansion, she could usually be found out in her garden. And this love of horticulture seems to have carried through into her afterlife, as now, a ghostly form matching the description of Mrs. Pittock is commonly sighted in the gardens and around the rest of the house, and is known for bringing with her a sense of calm and the sweet scent of roses. Also reported across mansion grounds are instances in which disembodied laughter is heard from empty rooms. Several have told of the sensation of being tapped, touched, or of having their shirts tugged on by invisible hands. And personal electronics have a habit of behaving erratically while on site, and a mysterious, ghostly little boy has both been sighted darting around the hallways after dark, and has also been known to play small pranks on the living. Lastly, the spirit of Henry Pittock himself has been encountered with frequency. He is always seemingly in high spirits, moving quickly and purposefully through the home, sometimes talking out loud to himself as he thinks through various plans or plots. And though much more rare, on occasion, those leaving the mansion at sundown have sworn they've seen both his silhouette and the silhouette of Georgiana, standing together arm in arm in the upper windows, as they fondly wave goodbye to their honored guests. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the most haunted places in Oregon. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone who could use a good scare. I'll see you all next time.